So, VR is an interesting thing because for many years it's been hyped up as the next big thing in gaming, and it's going to be the main way that we play video games from here on out. Like, it's the future, it's the future. That's what I've been hearing for the past decade plus at this point, and it has obviously never materialized. Not only has it not really grown that much in the past decade, as far as its share of the revenue of the video game industry compared to other mediums like consoles, PC, mobile, etc., it's only been a small fraction of the gaming market as a whole and has never really evolved more than just a small niche that is appealing to a lot of people, but at the end of the day is not a major force in the video game industry that has fundamentally changed the way that we play and interact with video games. Especially if you look at all the recent news surrounding Meta and the Meta Quest, the Quest being by far the largest VR headset in the market in terms of revenue, in terms of an install base and everything. It is the most successful VR headset of all time. And what is Meta doing? Well, first of all, they recently laid off a bunch of their staff that were working on VR exclusive titles. So their first party development, it's a lot of the studios were closed, and they laid off a bunch of their staff. So that is obviously not sign of a growing VR industry if the largest VR company is significantly scaling down its game production. And apparently, sequel to Arkham Shadows was canceled, a critically acclaimed game that many consider the greatest VR game of all time. Yeah, well, it was critically acclaimed, but I guess it didn't make enough money since there's no longer going to be a sequel. There was also a Harry Potter game that was supposed to be worked on that was also canceled. Bunch of games have been getting canceled lately. A bunch of people have been losing their jobs in the VR industry specifically, even more so than the gaming industry as a whole, right? And then even if you remember years ago when Facebook first rebranded to Meta, the whole thing that Mark Zuckerberg and the people at Facebook were pushing was the so-called metaverse, and it was going to fundamentally change the way that people interact with gaming, and just like it was going to change society as a whole. Like, they were going all in on this stuff. And the center point of that was a game called Horizon Worlds, which was basically a MMO type game. It was a social game, kind of like PlayStation Home, if you guys remember that, where it was just a bunch of avatars, and the only real gameplay was just people walking around and talking to each other. VR chat also is a VR game that does the same thing essentially, but this Horizon Worlds was the center of the metaverse, and their entire VR strategy and them rebranding their company from Facebook to Meta in the first place. Well, they just announced that Horizon Worlds is going fully mobile and is leaving VR. Now, you could say a lot of stuff that's been going on, specifically with Meta, has been more part of their own mismanagement of things rather than the actual potential of VR itself. And it's not an indictment on the VR industry as a whole, but Meta is a huge part of the VR industry. And as much, the whole Horizon Worlds game is just, honestly, it's garbage. And the fact that it's made by what's pretty much a $1 trillion company, it doesn't look like it. If you've ever seen the game before and the gameplay, it looks like a very, very, very low budget indie game that was made by like 3 guys in their garage. And this is like the whole focal point of their company. Yeah. So Meta definitely has a huge part to play themselves. But at the end of the day, if these games were making a lot of money and were very successful, and the VR industry as a whole was growing and not contracting, then Meta would not be conducting all these layoffs and canceling all these titles, especially sequels to critically acclaimed ones that are beloved by the entire VR community. And what other players do you have at this point aside from Meta, at least in the terms of the VR hardware industry? So I remember you used to have the HTC Vive back in the day. That's no longer a thing. PSVR was a lot more relevant during the PS4's life cycle than much more than the PSVR 2 is right now. That console, or that VR system, was abandoned within months of release, and you used to have the Valve Index, and now you have the Steam Frame that is coming out soon, and we'll see how that goes. It looks like a very impressive piece of hardware. Whether or not it's actually going to sell very well is a different story. So, in the past decade or so, like, we haven't really seen much growth. And even a lot of the major games that have come out on VR, like the big one being Resident Evil, how they've been porting a lot of the Resident Evil games onto VR, and they've been coming out with a VR version as well as console and PC. Capcom has said that the VR version of all those games have only accounted for like 2 to 3% of all sales for those Resident Evil games. So, yeah, I think that tells you everything you need to know about how small and niche VR is, because from what I've heard, the Resident Evil games actually are great on VR, so it's not a quality issue, it's just an issue of the industry not growing and not being very profitable or sustainable. I think part of it is that just the format of the technology itself doesn't work in a way that is mass appealing to a wide audience. And I'll talk about my own personal experiences real quick when it comes to VR. So I never actually got to try VR until recently when I got one of my close friends a VR headset for Christmas. I got him the MetaQuest 3S, and he was obsessed with it for like 2 weeks and then moved on back to playing regular PC console games. And these friends I'm talking about, they're actually a married couple, or at least they're about to be a married couple. So I got one of them a Quest 3S, and then I got the girl the Steam Deck. So, I mean, it's pretty much for both of them, because they're obviously, they're together, so they're going to use each other's gifts. And they've been using the Steam Deck way more than the Quest. Like, they don't even talk about VR or play it anymore. And it was only like 2 months ago when I got it for them, and they pretty much already forgotten about it. Not that I feel bad, like, or upset or anything. It's like, oh, I spent all that money on them, and they're not using it. Like, no. Like, I think it just speaks to VR not really being a format that's able to capture your interest and keep you hooked for a long period of time. When I tried it for myself when I was at their house, I was like, yeah, this is definitely not for me. I have bad motion sickness, and it's not good for people with motion sickness, because there are certain games where you jump, and it feels like, that feeling where your stomach drops when you're on a roller coaster? It kind of feels like that, but you're also not moving. So you just, your body and your mind is just so messed up from that experience, doesn't know what to do. And yeah, it doesn't really feel that good. And it doesn't for a lot of other people. For some people it does, and they don't have that problem at all. But for a lot of other people, myself and millions of others, it's like, no. Like, this is not a fun experience. It's certainly not one that I'm going to be willing to shell out hundreds upon hundreds of dollars for. And you also need to make sure you have enough space in your, like where you are, so that the trackers can work properly. And I am not really in that living situation where that is feasible for me. So that's another thing. Like, I have like a really small room, and it's just not enough to just be able to stand and have a whole bunch of space to move around like you have to in VR. And that's pretty much the same case for other people. Like, there are a lot of people who live in small apartments. VR is pretty much out the window for you. And the thing that really makes me not have a lot of faith in VR is not just like the numbers itself of these games just not doing that well, and studios closing down, and all these different things that are happening right now with VR. It's just the fact that when I made my video talking about VR in 2016, talking about why I think VR is going to be a failure, I looked back at that video, and it's like everything that I talked about, nothing has been remedied. Nothing has changed fundamentally. So we haven't even seen like much growth and development and like evolution in the VR experience. None of the major issues with it have been addressed properly, and it's just kind of stagnant at this point. I don't think it's ever going to stay beyond what it currently is. A niche that is very popular among a small subset of gamers, but never something that's going to be truly mainstream and transform the entire video game industry. That's safe to say, whether or not you're a VR fan watching this video, and maybe you didn't like some of the things that I said, but it's like, you got to admit that that's true. It's never going to take off like people thought it was going to. It's just never going to happen.